Hollywood has given us countless tough guy roles, men who look like they could knock out a villain with one punch. But here's the truth. Some of these actors weren't just playing tough on screen. They were tough. Soldiers, street fighters, boxers, daredevil men who lived dangerous lives long before stepping in front of the camera. What set these men apart was the fact that their toughness wasn't borrowed from scripts or created with camera tricks. It came from real battles, real scars, and real experiences that could never be faked. When they walked onto a set, directors didn't need to convince the audience these guys were believable. Life had already done the job. Their presence carried an edge, a raw power that made every punch, glare, and line of dialogue hit harder. Today, we're diving into the 10 roughest actors in Hollywood history. These guys didn't just act the part, they lived it. And wait until you hear about number 4. His story is so unbelievable that studio executives tried to bury the truth. 1. Charles Bronson. Charles Bronson's rise from grinding poverty to Hollywood legend is a story that makes most action scripts look tame. Born Charles Bukinski, he was one of 15 children in a Lithuanian immigrant family that barely scraped by in the coal mining town of Ehrenfeld, Pennsylvania. Survival wasn't just about putting food on the table. It was about enduring endless hardship. By the time most kids were still in grade school, young Charles was already working in the mines, covered in coal dust, hauling heavy loads underground. That environment carved toughness into him, not as an image, but as a way of life. Bronson never had the soft features of a matinee idol. His chiseled face, squinting eyes, and heavy jaw weren't manufactured trademarks. They were the scars and imprints of a man who had fought his way through life. He rarely spoke about his childhood, but when he did, it was blunt. Hunger, death, and violence surrounded him. In that world, weakness wasn't an option. Then came the war. Bronson served as an aerial gunner during World War II, flying combat missions over Japan in the belly of B-29 bombers. It was a role where death was one mechanical failure or enemy bullet away. He faced it with an unnerving calm that earned him not only respect, but also a Purple Heart when he was wounded in battle. That combination of fearlessness and endurance defined him long before the cameras rolled. When the war ended, Bronson didn't stroll into Hollywood with connections or glamour. He worked odd jobs, onion picker, cook, even a prize fighter while chasing auditions. Directors initially didn't know what to do with him. He wasn't polished, he wasn't pretty, and he certainly didn't look like the usual leading man. But there was something raw in his presence that no makeup chair could replicate. Unlike other actors who trained to throw stage punches, Bronson already knew how real fights worked. His time as a boxer and laborer gave him a strength that co-stars often felt firsthand. On set, when he grabbed another actor during a fight scene, it wasn't just acting. People felt the iron grip of a man who had built muscle the hard way. Even the mob once threatened him after Death Wish, and Bronson shrugged it off with the same stoic grit that defined his life. Charles Bronson never acted tough. He simply was tough, a man forged in mines, tested in war, and hardened by survival. 2. Steve McQueen. Steve McQueen wasn't called the King of Cool just because of his smirk, his swagger, or the way he could ride a motorcycle on screen. He earned that reputation by living a life of risk, rebellion, and danger that made even his toughest roles look tame in comparison. Long before Hollywood knew his name, McQueen was already testing the limits of how far he could push himself, and often everyone around him. His childhood was anything but stable. Shuffled between homes, abandoned by his father, and abused by a stepfather, McQueen grew up on the streets where trouble wasn't hard to find. By his early teens, he had run away more than once, and survival demanded sharp instincts and a willingness to fight back. At just 14, he was already carving out a reputation as a street-tough kid who knew how to handle himself. Eventually, he enlisted in the United States Marine Corps. Even there, his rebellious streak couldn't be contained. He racked up demotions, spent time in the brig, and pushed authority to the breaking point. Yet, when it mattered most, McQueen showed his true grit. During an Arctic training mission, a tank carrying fellow Marines broke through the ice into frigid waters. McQueen risked his life to save them, pulling men from certain death. It was a rare moment where his restless energy translated into heroism. After leaving the military, McQueen could have settled into an easier path. Instead, he turned to racing motorcycles and cars with the same ferocity he once used in street fights. Racing wasn't just a hobby, it was his obsession. On weekends, while other actors polished their image, McQueen entered competitive events, often under fake names, so studios wouldn't shut him down. The danger was real, the crashes frequent, but he craved the adrenaline. This passion bled into his acting career. Unlike most stars, McQueen hated stunt doubles. On The Great Escape, he insisted on handling nearly all his motorcycle stunts. During The Sand Pebbles, he almost drowned filming a river sequence. Even fire didn't stop him while shooting The Towering Inferno. McQueen faced real flames most actors wouldn't even get near. Directors loved the realism, but feared his recklessness. Off-screen, McQueen's toughness was just as clear. When he learned the Manson family had targeted him, he didn't panic or hide. He simply carried a loaded pistol everywhere he went. For Steve McQueen, danger wasn't a role, it was his way of life. 3. Robert Mitchum. Robert Mitchum's screen presence was famously effortless, the kind of cool that couldn't be faked. But what most audiences never realized was that his detached, dangerous aura came directly from a life that tested him long before Hollywood did. Mitchum didn't need to act tough. He already was. His early years were marked by struggle. Orphaned young, he grew up during the Great Depression and quickly learned how to survive on his own. As a teenager, Mitchum became a hobo, hopping trains across America, drifting from town to town. That wasn't romantic rebellion, it was raw survival. Riding the rails meant dealing with brutal weather, hunger, and violent encounters with guards or other desperate men. Those experiences toughened him in ways no studio boxing coach or drama teacher ever could. In that rough world, Mitchum also discovered fighting. He stepped into makeshift boxing rings, competing for small purses under the name Jimmy Mitchum. The bouts were real, and so were the punches. His broken nose, later part of his rugged look, came from those days. He learned how to take a hit, how to deliver one, and most importantly, how to stay calm in the middle of chaos. That quiet, dangerous calm later became his trademark on screen. At one point, Mitchum landed in real trouble. Arrested in Georgia for vagrancy, he was sentenced to a chain gang, an experience so brutal it left a permanent impression. Toiling in the sun, shackled, and treated like property, Mitchum endured it all with a detached toughness that defined him ever after. Few Hollywood actors could even imagine such a reality. Mitchum had lived it. When his Hollywood break finally came, directors noticed that his performances carried an authenticity others lacked. He didn't overplay fights. He didn't act wide-eyed or theatrical. His movements were efficient, grounded, and believable because they came from lived experience. On Night of the Hunter, he carried Shelley Winters in take after take with such ease that the director was stunned. Off-camera, his strength was as effortless as his acting. Even scandal couldn't shake him. When he was busted for marijuana in 1948, a career-ending event for most, Mitchum calmly served his 60 days in jail and walked out with his reputation somehow tougher than before. He summed up his attitude perfectly. "I have two acting styles, with or without a horse." For Robert Mitchum, toughness wasn't performance, it was his nature. 4. Audie Murphy. When Hollywood tough guys are mentioned, names like John Wayne or Clint Eastwood usually spring to mind. But the reality is that none of them matched the sheer grit of Audie Murphy, a man whose life story was so unbelievable that studios actually toned it down for fear audiences wouldn't buy it. Murphy didn't look the part of a fighter. Standing just 5'5" with a baby face, he seemed better suited to playing the innocent sidekick than a hardened warrior. Yet, behind that unassuming exterior was a soldier, who by the age of 19 had already become the most decorated American combat veteran of World War II. His actions on the battlefield remain the stuff of legend. The most famous moment came in France, where Murphy single-handedly held off an entire company of German soldiers for an hour. Out of ammunition and already wounded, he climbed onto a burning tank destroyer and used its machine gun to mow down enemy troops until reinforcements arrived. Then, as if that weren't enough, he led a counterattack that pushed the Germans back. For this act alone, he was awarded the Medal of Honor, but that was just one highlight in a career full of extraordinary courage. By the time he returned home, Murphy had received every American combat award for valor, along with multiple decorations from France and Belgium. Estimates suggest he personally accounted for over 200 enemy soldiers in combat. Most men would have been broken by such experiences, but Murphy carried those memories into civilian life, forever changed. Hollywood discovered him when he appeared on the cover of Life magazine. Directors were intrigued but skeptical. He looked far too gentle to play action roles. Ironically, this same boy next door image gave his performances a unique power. When he starred in To Hell and Back, portraying himself, the filmmakers had to leave out parts of his real story because the truth sounded too far-fetched for audiences to believe. Off-screen, Murphy battled severe PTSD. He slept with a pistol under his pillow, endured night terrors, and carried the haunted look of a man who had truly lived through hell. Yet in public he remained quiet, humble, and self-controlled. Only once did his combat instincts erupt in civilian life, a reminder that beneath his polite demeanor was a man more lethal than any role he played. Audie Murphy wasn't just Hollywood's toughest actor. He was, quite simply, one of the toughest men who ever lived. 5. James Cagney. James Cagney may not have been the tallest or the broadest actor in Hollywood, but pound for pound, he was one of the toughest men ever to walk onto a film set. Standing just 5'5", he relied not on size, but on speed, skill, and an iron will forged in the rough neighborhoods of New York City's Lower East Side. For Cagney, toughness wasn't a role he played. It was a way of surviving from the time he was a boy. Growing up in a world dominated by street gangs, fights weren't optional. If you wanted respect, you had to earn it with your fists. Cagney learned early to box, developing the lightning reflexes and sharp footwork that would later define his screen persona. These weren't moves choreographed in a gym, they were lessons from real street brawls where hesitation meant defeat. His compact frame became an advantage, giving him speed and agility that often left opponents swinging at air. Before Hollywood, Cagney even competed as an amateur boxer. His reputation was simple: fast hands, a solid chin, and an unwillingness to back down. When audiences later saw him throwing punches in gangster films like The Public Enemy or White Heat, they weren't just seeing acting. They were seeing muscle memory from real fights. What made him unique, though, was the mix of toughness and artistry. Alongside his fighting background, Cagney was also a trained dancer. That unusual combination gave him extraordinary coordination, the grace to glide across a stage, and the explosive power to snap into a brawl. He could go from tapping in rhythm to throwing a devastating hook without missing a beat. This duality made his fight scenes some of the most convincing of his era. He also had a reputation for intensity on set. During The Public Enemy, his co-star Mae Clarke was genuinely shocked when he smashed a grapefruit into her face, without warning, a moment that became iconic precisely because it wasn't staged. Others learned quickly that when Cagney threw a punch on camera, there was always a chance it might connect for real. Off-screen, he carried the same reputation. Friends and colleagues described him as someone you simply didn't mess with. Bob Hope once joked that if you crossed Cagney, he'd flatten you first and help you up after. Cagney himself put it best: "When you grow up my size, you either learn to fight or you get used to the ground." He chose to fight, and that toughness never left him. 6. Lee Marvin. Lee Marvin wasn't just convincing when he played hardened killers, mercenaries, or soldiers. He was the real thing. Long before Hollywood turned him into one of the most recognizable tough guys of the 1960s and 70s, Marvin had already lived through experiences that left permanent scars, both physical and psychological. Born in New York in 1924, Marvin grew up restless and rebellious. When World War II broke out, he joined the U.S. Marine Corps and was shipped off to the Pacific Theater. There, he found himself in some of the bloodiest combat of the entire war. As a sniper with the 4th Marine Division, he saw death up close. During the brutal Battle of Saipan in 1944, Marvin's unit was nearly wiped out. He was hit by machine gun fire that tore into his back and severed his sciatic nerve, leaving him with a limp he carried for the rest of his life. For his wounds, he received the Purple Heart, but he rarely romanticized his service. Marvin once summed it up bluntly: "Any man who says he enjoyed combat is either a liar or a fool." That authenticity stayed with him on screen. Unlike actors who treated fight scenes as choreography, Marvin understood real violence. His movements were quick, ugly, and efficient, just as they had been in combat. Directors noticed. John Boorman, who worked with him on Point Blank, said Marvin's performances carried a chilling realism because he wasn't pretending. He knew exactly how violence looked and felt. Marvin's toughness wasn't limited to his military past. Even later in life, he was notorious for barroom brawls. One famous story tells of Marvin, in his 40s, taking on an entire team of lumberjacks during filming in Oregon. Bruised but unbowed, he showed up to set the next morning, ready to work. That kind of durability became his trademark. Yet Marvin wasn't all fists and bravado. Friends and colleagues described him as deeply intelligent, a man who could discuss literature and philosophy 1 minute and then demonstrate the fastest way to drop an opponent the next. This combination of brute force and thoughtfulness gave his screen presence unusual depth. When Roger Ebert once wrote that audiences believed Marvin's threats because he could carry them out, it wasn't hyperbole. Lee Marvin was a man who had seen war, carried its scars, and lived with a dangerous authenticity that few actors could ever match. 7. John Wayne. John Wayne, known to generations simply as the Duke, wasn't just Hollywood's symbol of rugged masculinity. He actually lived much of it. His image as the quintessential Western hero wasn't crafted out of thin air. It came from a lifetime of physical endurance, grit, and a refusal to back down even when his body was breaking. Born Marion Morrison in 1907, Wayne grew up in Iowa and later Southern California. From an early age, he was tall, broad-shouldered, and powerful, standing 6'4" even as a young man. That strength earned him a football scholarship to the University of Southern California. Though an injury cut short his athletic career, the discipline and toughness of the gridiron stuck with him. Even when he entered Hollywood as a prop man, he was already hauling massive set pieces that normally took several men to move. What set Wayne apart from many of his peers was his commitment to doing his own stunts. Long before insurance policies dictated what actors could risk, Wayne threw himself into horseback falls, fistfights, and brawls. On the set of The Alamo, he cracked ribs performing a dangerous horse stunt, then taped himself up and went right back to directing and acting. For Wayne, toughness wasn't negotiable, it was expected. Perhaps the most extreme example of his resilience came during the filming of The Conqueror. Shot in Utah downwind of nuclear test sites, the cast and crew were unknowingly exposed to radioactive fallout. Of the 220 people involved, nearly half developed cancer in the years that followed. Wayne among them. Yet even as illness crept in, he continued taking on physically demanding roles that would have exhausted younger men. After a lung and several ribs were removed in cancer surgery, Wayne stunned doctors by returning to action roles in The Sons of Katie Elder. Just months after surgery, he insisted on performing his own fight scenes, refusing to use doubles. Director Henry Hathaway recalled trying to dissuade him, only to be told flatly, "Either I do my own stunts, or you find someone else." That stubborn courage defined him. Even his critics admitted Wayne was tougher than his politics or his swagger suggested. Kirk Douglas once said, "Disagree with him all you want, but don't question the man's toughness." John Wayne wasn't simply pretending to be the ultimate American hero. He lived it often at extraordinary personal cost. Anthony Quinn. Anthony Quinn's reputation as one of Hollywood's most rugged stars didn't come from image consultants or studio hype. It came from a life that demanded physical toughness, hard labor, and raw survival long before he became a two-time Academy Award winner. His on-screen power was never manufactured, it was lived. Quinn was born during the turbulence of the Mexican Revolution in 1915. His earliest memories weren't of comfort or stability, but of soldiers, gunfire, and his family fleeing for safety. When they eventually immigrated to the United States, life didn't get easier. They landed in the poorest parts of Los Angeles, where young Anthony had to work from childhood to help keep his family afloat. By the time most kids were still in school, he was carrying loads, swinging hammers, and taking whatever jobs he could find. His imposing physique wasn't sculpted in a gym. It was built hauling meat as a butcher's apprentice, digging on construction sites, and earning extra money as a professional boxer. For Quinn, boxing wasn't a hobby or a publicity stunt. It was a way to put food on the table. He fought for real, and he fought hard, leaving him with a broken nose and hardened look that would later give his characters such authenticity. On set, Quinn's strength was legendary. During the filming of Zorba the Greek, he carried logs across the beach loads that normally required 2 men. Instead of trick photography, audiences saw genuine feats of power. Even Greek laborers working as extras were impressed. That wasn't acting, that was Quinn being Quinn. His insistence on doing things himself often alarmed directors. In The Guns of Navarone, he performed a dangerous cliff climb at age 46, ignoring stunt doubles and insurance warnings. That same determination kept him pushing into his 50s and 60s, where he still took on physically punishing roles without complaint. What separated Quinn from many of Hollywood's other tough guys was his confidence in vulnerability. He didn't fear showing emotion, even tears, on screen. To him, toughness wasn't about posturing. It was about knowing he had nothing to prove. Co-star Sophia Loren once said, "Anthony had the body of a warrior and the soul of a poet." That balance made him magnetic. Reflecting later in life, Quinn said, "I've carried real loads, thrown real punches, and felt real hunger. When I play those men, I'm not pretending, I'm remembering." That honesty was the foundation of his lasting toughness. 9. Charlton Heston. Charlton Heston became famous for his larger-than-life roles in epics like Ben-Hur, The Ten Commandments, and El Cid. But what set him apart from many of his peers was that his toughness wasn't confined to the screen. He lived it, endured it, and proved it time and again, both in front of the camera and in real life. Born in 1923, Heston grew up in the Midwest, where outdoor living and physical work shaped his early years. He developed into a strong, athletic young man, the type of build that Hollywood often sculpted artificially for its stars. For Heston, it came naturally. When World War II broke out, he joined the Army Air Forces, serving as an aerial gunner on B-25 bombers. Flying at high altitudes, surrounded by flak and enemy fire, gave him a first-hand understanding of fear and courage. He later said, "When you're in a B-25 at 15,000 feet and people are shooting at you, it tends to focus the mind wonderfully." That experience left him with a calmness under pressure that defined the rest of his career. In Hollywood, Heston developed a reputation for physical intensity. He refused to let stunt doubles take the risks for him. For Ben-Hur, he trained for months to master chariot racing, suffering injuries along the way. In the film's legendary chariot race, he personally handled most of the stunts, including a near-fatal moment where his chariot almost flipped. Director William Wyler remarked that most actors would have refused, but Heston insisted on authenticity. The same pattern repeated across his career. While filming the agony and the ecstasy, he spent hours with his arms raised above his head to replicate Michelangelo painting the Sistine Chapel. The effort left him with severe muscle spasms, but he pushed through it, convinced that the discomfort would lend truth to the role. During El Cid, Sophia Loren recalled him enduring Spanish summer heat inside a 70-pound suit of armor without ever complaining. Heston's toughness wasn't just physical. He also displayed moral courage. In the 1960s, he marched with Martin Luther King Jr., standing up for civil rights at a time when many Hollywood stars avoided controversy. Later in life, he became equally outspoken about his beliefs, whether people agreed or not. Director Franklin J. Schaffner, who worked with him on Planet of the Apes, once said, "Chuck didn't just play heroes, he embodied them." For Charlton Heston, toughness meant more than physical strength. It meant conviction, endurance, and the willingness to stand firm, no matter the cost. 10. Kirk Douglas. Kirk Douglas wasn't born into privilege, nor did he coast into Hollywood on good looks alone. He came from nothing, the son of poor Jewish immigrants, raised in such poverty that his family sometimes couldn't afford food. That early deprivation shaped him into a fighter, both literally and figuratively. As a young man, Douglas discovered wrestling, a skill that quickly became his ticket out of hardship. He wrestled competitively in school, earning a scholarship to St. Lawrence University. Unlike staged wrestling for entertainment, collegiate matches demanded strength, technique, and raw toughness. Douglas thrived, developing the physical resilience and determination that later defined his career. World War II added another chapter. Douglas served as a communications officer aboard a submarine chaser in the U.S. Navy. Anti-submarine duty was one of the most dangerous assignments of the war, crammed into small vessels, constantly threatened by German U-boats, and under relentless stress. Douglas endured conditions that would have broken weaker men. An injury eventually forced his discharge, but the experience left him with a hardened sense of discipline and danger. That toughness carried into his film work. On set, Douglas treated acting like combat. He threw himself into roles with a physical ferocity few could match. For Spartacus, he trained with professional wrestlers and gladiator experts, refusing shortcuts and sustaining injuries that would have sidelined most actors. After a dangerous fall during filming, he was back at work within days. His co-star, Burt Lancaster, a tough man in his own right, once said, "Kirk attacks acting like a fight. He doesn't just perform a scene. He confronts it." But Douglas's resilience wasn't confined to his prime. In 1991, he survived a helicopter crash that killed 2 others. Though badly injured, he refused to let it end him. Then, in 1996, a massive stroke left him struggling to speak. At an age when many would have retired quietly, Douglas fought through years of therapy, regaining enough speech to continue public life and even writing about his recovery. His determination was as inspiring as his film roles. Director Howard Hawks once remarked, "Some actors look tough. Kirk is tough." He was never afraid of confrontation, on screen or off. Douglas himself summed it up best. "Tell a man no 3 times, and if he's still there, you may have to hit him." That was Kirk Douglas, a man who fought his way from poverty to legend and never stopped fighting until the end. Hollywood has always loved its tough guy heroes, but as we've seen, some of the roughest actors in history didn't need scripts or stunt doubles to prove their grit. From Audie Murphy, the boy-faced war hero who rewrote battlefield history, to Charles Bronson, hardened in coal mines and war zones, to Steve McQueen, who risked his life for thrills on and off screen, these men lived dangerously before cameras ever rolled. Others, like Lee Marvin, James Cagney, and Kirk Douglas, carried real scars into their work, while giants like John Wayne, Anthony Quinn, and Charlton Heston showed that endurance, strength, and conviction were not just performances, but lifelong traits. What makes their stories enduring is that toughness came in many forms: physical, moral, and emotional. They weren't just actors, they were survivors, fighters, and warriors. Legends whose authenticity can never be duplicated in today's Hollywood.